The Concord station turned slowly against the dark. A wheel of pale metal and colored light hung above a world that no human had ever set foot on. Inside its diplomatic ring, the air smelled faintly of ozone and of 100 alien perfumes that did not agree with one another, and the gravity had been set to a careful average that suited no species present and offended most of them equally. It was in this compromise of a place, on a compromise of a morning, that a 16-year-old girl named Mara Voss stood in a receiving hall and tried very hard not to yawn. She was small by the standards of the room. She would have been small by the standards of any room in the galaxy, because the galaxy had learned to grow its people tall. The Thren towered nearly 3 meters when they straightened, all sinew and gray hide, and the slow, deliberate weight of a people who had never once in their history been in a hurry. The Selu drifted on their cushions of warm gas. The Ashkith clicked and rustled in their exoskeletons like a field of patient locusts. And among them moved the human delegation, 6 people from a planet that most of the assembled species could not have found on a chart a decade earlier, led by a tired-looking envoy named Das Herrick and supported, in the small and unglamorous ways that support actually happens, by a teenage girl carrying a data slate almost as large as her torso. Mara was not there because anyone believed she was important. She was there because her mother, Counselor Anais Voss, had brought her along on the long voyage out from the colony worlds, the way parents in dangerous professions sometimes keep their children close rather than leave them behind, and because a girl who has grown up on a heavy world learns early that the fastest way to be left alone is to make yourself useful. So Mara carried things. She fetched things. She stood at the edge of rooms and remembered names, and she watched the way the tall people looked at the short people, and she said nothing at all. The tall people were looking now. A cluster of Thren had gathered near the great curved window, and one of them had turned to watch the human delegation cross the hall, and Mara felt the weight of that attention the way you feel a change in the wind. The Thren was young for his kind, which meant he was perhaps 40 and stood a full head above the others of his caste, and he wore the banded harness of a warrior who had not yet earned the right to stop announcing it. His name, she would learn, was Voral-Kosh, and he belonged to the martial order that the Thren sent to guard their envoys, and he had never in his life met a creature he could not have broken across his knee. He was staring at Mara because she had just picked up the delegation's equipment case. It was not a small case. It held the portable atmospheric scrubbers and the backup translator cores and the sealed sample containers, and it was rated at 110 kilograms fully loaded, and it had wheels for exactly that reason. The station porters used a powered lift to move cases like it. Mara had reached down, wrapped one hand around the recessed handle, and lifted it off the transport pallet with the bored, one-armed motion of a girl moving a school bag, because on the world where she was born 110 kilograms weighed rather less than half of what it weighed here, and because she had been carrying her own body and everything attached to it through nearly twice a standard gravity for the whole of her life. She set the case down beside the envoy, without noticing that the room had gone a little quieter. Voral-Kosh noticed. He tilted his broad head, the horizontal pupils of his eyes contracting to slots, and he made a low sound in his chest that his translator declined to render into words. "Something wrong?" Das Herrick asked, following the warrior's gaze. The envoy was a mild man who had spent 30 years learning to read the moods of people who did not have faces the way humans understood faces, and he had already begun, out of long habit, to smile the careful smile that heads off trouble. "The young one," said Voral-Kosh, and his translated voice came through flat and metallic, stripped of whatever the original carried. "It lifted the burden alone." "She," Herrick corrected gently. "Yes, she's stronger than she looks." "It looks," said the warrior, "as though a strong wind would fold it." Mara heard this. She was 16, and she had spent the voyage being talked about as though she were furniture by a great many species who assumed that a small creature could not possibly matter, and something in her jaw tightened. But her mother had drilled the rules into her before they ever docked. You are a guest in the house of 1,000 peoples. You do not correct them. You do not challenge them. You make yourself small, and you make yourself pleasant, and you let the adults handle what the adults are here to handle. So Mara looked at the floor, and she folded her hands, and she said nothing, and she felt the old familiar heat of being underestimated bank itself down into a coal she had long ago learned to sit on. "She is a child," Herrick said, and there was a warning under the mildness now, the faint edge of a man reminding another that certain topics were not for open air. "Among my people the young are protected. I'd ask that she not be made a subject of study." Voral-Kosh regarded the envoy for a long moment. Then he made the sound again, the untranslatable one, and turned back to the window, and the matter appeared to be closed. It was not closed. Mara knew it was not closed, because she had seen the way the warrior's gaze had lingered, and she recognized it. It was the look of someone who has been shown a thing that does not fit, and who has decided, without quite admitting it to himself, that he is going to keep pulling at the edges of it until it comes apart into something he can understand. She had seen that look on the faces of children on the colony who could not believe she had climbed the eastern scarp alone, and on the faces of new teachers, and once on the face of a mining supervisor who had watched her lever a fallen support beam off a trapped man, and then spent an hour insisting the beam must have been hollow. People did not like it when the world disagreed with what they knew. They pushed back against the disagreement, and the pushing back always, eventually, landed on Mara. She followed the delegation out of the hall and did not look at the Thren again, and she told herself it was nothing. The summit had a name that the diplomats used, and a purpose that the diplomats mostly did not talk about. Officially, it was the third Convocation on emergent membership, a gathering of the Concord's established powers to consider whether the human species, having stumbled out of its home system a bare 30 years before, should be granted a provisional seat and the protections that came with it. Unofficially, it was an audition, and everyone knew it was an audition, and the humans had come to it carrying the particular anxiety of a poor family invited to dinner by rich relatives who have not decided whether to be kind. The Concord did not fear humanity. This was the thing that Mara understood better than most of the adults, precisely because she was young enough to still hear how people spoke when they thought the children were not listening. The Concord did not fear humanity because the Concord had looked at humanity's ships, which were slow, and its numbers, which were small, and its handful of colonies clinging to marginal worlds, and had concluded that here was a client species, a people to be sponsored and shaped and gently steered, useful perhaps as laborers or as a buffer population on the frontier, but never, ever as an equal. The tallness of the galaxy was not only a matter of bodies, it was a matter of assumption. The old species had grown up on kind worlds, gentle worlds, worlds with shallow gravity wells and mild weather and few predators, because it takes a kind world to give a species the long leisure it needs to build starships before it burns itself out. The galaxy was tall and slow and comfortable, and it had decided that comfort was the same as strength. Humanity had not grown up on a kind world. Earth was, by the placid standards of the Concord, a horror. Its gravity was punishing. Its oceans could crush a Thren hull flat at depth. Its temperatures swung from poles to deserts across a range that would have killed most conquered species outright. And it had spent 4 billion years manufacturing predators, plagues, and disasters with the tireless invention of a world that seemed genuinely to be trying to kill everything on it. And then, having failed to kill the thing that eventually climbed up out of its forests, Earth had launched that thing into the void aboard chemical rockets, and the thing had gone. The colonies were worse. Humanity, forced to settle wherever it could reach, had put down roots on worlds the Conquered had surveyed and dismissed as uninhabitable. High-gravity worlds, thin-air worlds, Worlds where the summers would boil an unprotected celu and the winters would freeze the fluids of an Ashketh solid. And on one of these, a heavy-limbed world called Baraka Colony, where a grown woman weighed what 3 grown women weighed on Concord Station, and every step was a small act of defiance against the planet itself. A girl named Mara Voss had been born, and had learned to walk, and had grown strong in the ordinary, unremarkable, universal way that all children grow strong, by simply living where she lived. To Mara, she was nothing special. This was the truth that the whole summit would eventually turn upon, though no one there yet suspected it. She was not a warrior. She was not enhanced or trained or chosen. She was a normal girl of normal build for her age and her world, neither the strongest of her friends nor the fastest, forever losing foot races to a boy named Tavi who could outrun anyone, forever coming second in the climbing meets. She had never once thought of her body as a weapon or a marvel, because on BHARAK, everyone's body was the same kind of dense, patient, overbuilt engine, and a thing that everyone has is a thing that no one notices. She had come out to the Concord expecting the tall people to be, in some way she could not quite picture, more, faster maybe, or harder to hurt. She had spent the voyage quietly bracing herself to be the weakest person in every room. It had taken her about a day to realize the truth, and the truth had frightened her more than any imagined superiority could have. The tall people were not more, they were less. Their tallness was the tallness of things grown in soft soil. She had watched a cello attendant strain to lift a serving tray that Mara could have balanced on 2 fingers. She had watched Thren warriors, the great martial caste, breathing hard after climbing a single flight of stairs in the station's inconstant gravity. She had watched them and she had understood, with the sinking clarity of a child who realizes the adults do not know something important, that the whole galaxy had built its picture of humanity on the belief that small meant weak, and that the picture was about to break, and that when it broke it would break on top of somebody. She had hoped, right up until the moment Voral Kosh turned from the window, that the somebody would not be her. That evening she stood on the observation deck with her mother, watching the world turn below. Anais Voss was a broad, gray-eyed woman with the calm of someone who had spent her life making difficult decisions and living with them, and she stood the way people from heavy worlds stood, planted, unhurried, taking up exactly as much space as she chose to. "You lifted the equipment case in front of them," Anais said. "It was not a question." "It has wheels," Mara said. "It was faster." "It was faster." Her mother did not smile quite. "Mara, do you understand what these people think we are?" "Weak," Mara said. "Small. They think we're kittens they found in the rain." "They think we're clients," Anais said, "which is worse because clients can be owned. The whole reason we're here is to convince them we're worth protecting, and the fastest way to lose that is to make them afraid of us before they've decided to respect us. Fear without respect is just a reason to strike first." She turned from the window and looked at her daughter, and her face was gentler than her words. "I'm not scolding you. You've done nothing wrong. But I need you to be careful, because you carry something in your 2 arms that the diplomats can't put on a table, and I don't yet know how to make these people meet it without flinching." Mara looked at her hands. They were an ordinary girl's hands, blunt-nailed, a little scarred across the knuckles from the climbing walls back home. She thought about the case, and the warrior's slitted eyes, and the sound he had made that the machine would not translate. "He's going to test me," she said quietly. "The tall one, the warrior. He didn't like that the case didn't fit what he knows. He's going to keep pushing until it does." Anais was silent for a moment. Then she put a heavy, warm hand on her daughter's shoulder, and the weight of it was a comfort, the honest weight of someone from home. "Then you'll do what we always do," she said. "You'll hold still, you'll let him push, and you'll be so gentle that he has to be the one to explain to everyone why he broke his own hand against a child who was only trying to be kind." She squeezed once. "Can you do that? Can you hold still, even when it hurts, even when every part of you wants to push back?" Mara thought about the coal she had been sitting on for the whole voyage, the banked heat of 100 small dismissals. She thought about Tavi, who always beat her in the races, and about how she had learned to lose without minding, because minding was for people who did not know their own worth. "Yes," she said, "I can hold still." She believed it when she said it. She would have 3 more days to find out whether it was true, and by the end of them the whole tall galaxy would be looking down at a 16-year-old girl and discovering, all at once and far too late, that it had been looking in the wrong direction the entire time. Below the deck, the world turned, indifferent, and the station's lights burned small against the dark, and somewhere along the diplomatic ring a warrior of the Thren sat awake in the middle of his sleep cycle, turning a memory over and over in his mind, unable to make it lie flat. The night between the first day and the second, Mara did not sleep well, and near the middle of the station's artificial dark she gave up on it and went walking. The diplomatic ring was never truly empty. It ran on a dozen different sleep cycles at once, and there were always some species awake in the quiet hours, and Mara moved through the low blue light of the corridors past Selu drifting on their Niterans and Ashkith clicking softly to one another in the shadows, and none of them paid her much mind, because a small human girl was still to them, a thing beneath notice. She liked it that way. She had spent the whole voyage being beneath notice, and there was a comfort in it that she was not ready to give up, a comfort she did not yet know she was about to lose forever. She walked until she found a viewport that looked down on the world below, and she stood there with her forehead nearly touching the cold, transparent metal, and she thought about home, and about her father, and about the strange, sick feeling that had been building in her since she had lifted the equipment case and felt the whole room turn to look. She had been afraid, on the voyage out, of being the weakest thing in every room. She had not once considered that she might be the strongest, and that being the strongest, among people who feared strength, might be far more dangerous than being weak. On Baraka, strength was ordinary and mercy was ordinary, and no one thought twice about either. But here she was beginning to understand that she had walked into a place where the two had come apart, where strength meant threat and gentleness meant weakness, and there was no room in the whole tall galaxies imagining for a thing that was both strong and kind at once. It frightened her more than anything the tall people could have done to her. She could bear being underestimated. She was not sure she could bear being feared. "You do not sleep either," said a voice behind her, low and rustling, and Mara turned to find one of the Ashkith regarding her with the faceted lenses of its eyes. It was the delegate, she realized, the one who had spoken in the chamber about human industrial output, and it had stopped in the corridor and folded its forelimbs in a gesture she did not recognize. "Forgive me. I did not mean to intrude upon your solitude. My people find these hours useful for thinking, and I had not expected to share them with a member of the delegation we spent the day discussing." "I couldn't sleep," Mara said. "I keep thinking about the way everyone looked at me today, when I picked up the case." The Ashkith was quiet for a moment, its lenses catching the blue light. "You noticed that," it said. "Most would not have. Your species is younger than we believed, I think, and also older. It is a strange thing to say of a child, but you watch a room the way our eldest watch a room, as though you have learned that watching is the only protection the small are permitted." It tilted its angular head. "May I tell you something, human child, that I did not say in the chamber? My analysis of your people's output is accurate. You produce too little to be a partner and too much to be ignored, and my colleagues take this to mean you are a minor thing, a marginal thing, a thing to be managed. But I have looked at the same numbers and seen something else. I have seen where you live. I have seen the worlds you have made your homes, worlds my own people surveyed and marked as death, and I have seen that you produce anything at all from such places, and I have wondered what manner of creature builds a functioning colony on a world that would kill me in an afternoon and calls it home, and complains only of the commute." Its lenses glittered. "I do not think you are marginal. I think you are the most interesting thing to enter this Concord in 1,000 years, and I think my colleagues are about to make a serious error, and I do not yet know how to stop them, because they are comfortable, and the comfortable do not listen until the discomfort arrives." Mara looked at the strange, precise creature in the blue dark and felt, for the first time since docking, that someone in the tall galaxy had actually seen her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for looking. Most of them don't." "Most of them have never had to," said the Ashkith. "That is the whole of it, I think. Go and rest, child. Tomorrow will ask more of you than today, and I fear it will not ask permission." And it rustled away into the blue, leaving Mara alone at the viewport with the turning world and the growing certainty that the strange creature was right. The second day of the Convocation began with speeches, which meant that Mara spent it in the observation gallery above the main chamber, watching the tall people talk about her species as though it were a proposal on a page. The chamber was a great bowl of tiered seating, and the acoustics carried every word up to the gallery whether you wanted them or not, and Mara sat with her data slate on her knees and listened to a procession of dignitaries explain, with enormous courtesy, why humanity was not quite ready. The Selu representative spoke of the humans' short lives and shorter memories, and wondered aloud whether a people who died before their second century could be trusted to keep a treaty across generations. The Ashkith delegate clicked through a long analysis of human industrial output and concluded that the species produced too little to be a partner and too much to be ignored, and recommended a period of guided development under Concord supervision, which was the polite phrase the Concord used for the thing that was not quite conquest. And through it all the Thren said nothing, because the Thren did not deal in words when they could help it, and their entire civilization rested on a single, unspoken conviction that Mara was only beginning to understand, that the measure of a people was what they could endure, and that everything else was decoration. Das Herrick spoke for the humans. He was good at it, in the patient, unshowy way of a man who has learned that you cannot argue a room out of a thing it has already decided to feel. He talked about the colonies, and the trade the humans could offer, and the terrible worlds they had made livable, and Mara watched the faces in the bowl and saw that the words were sliding off. It was not that the tall people disbelieved him. It was that they had already filed humanity under a heading, and the heading was small, and nothing Herrick said was large enough to move the file. "They're not listening," Mara murmured. Beside her sat a Thren she had not expected to see in the gallery. It was not Voral Kosh. It was an older one, gray fading toward white along the ridges of the skull, wearing not the warrior's harness but a plain gray robe, and it had settled onto the reinforced bench beside her at some point during the speeches without her quite noticing, which was itself remarkable for a creature the size of a doorway. Its name, it told her, was Sina Torvald, and it was the Thren's keeper of records, which she gathered was something between a historian and a judge. "No," Sina Torvald agreed. Its translated voice was softer than Voral Kosh's had been, and it had taken the trouble to have its translator use the pronoun Herrick had asked for. "They are not listening. Do you know why?" Mara considered whether she was allowed to answer honestly. She decided the old Thren had come to sit beside a human child on purpose, and that people who did things on purpose usually wanted the truth. "Because we're small," she said, "and they think small is the same as weak, and they think weak is the same as safe. So they've decided we're a safe little problem they can manage, and now they can't hear anything that says otherwise." The old Thren was quiet for a long moment. Its eyes, she noticed, were not slitted like Voral Kosh's. They were wide and dark and very old, and they were looking at her with an attention that felt entirely different from the warrior's, an attention that wanted to understand rather than to solve. "You are young," Sina Torvald said at last, "to see so clearly the shape of a room." "I've been in a lot of rooms where people talked about me like I wasn't there," Mara said. "You get good at seeing the shape of them." "Yes," said Sina Torvald, "I imagine you do." It folded its great gray hands in its lap. I will tell you something, human child, because you have told me something true, and it is only courtesy to answer in kind. My kinsman Vorel Kosh spoke of you last night in the warrior's hall. He said that he watched a human hatchling lift a burden that two of our porters together could not manage, and that when he remarked upon it, your elder hid the young one away and asked that the matter be forgotten. The old eyes did not blink. Among my people, when a thing is hidden, we do not forget it. We remember it harder. We are a people who have learned over a very long and very painful history that what is hidden is what matters most. So you should understand that the more your delegation protects you, the more certain my kinsman becomes that you are the thing worth looking at. Mara felt the coal in her chest bank a little hotter. We're not hiding anything, she said. We're just trying not to scare anyone. I know, said Sina Torvald, and there was something in the flat translated voice that might, in the original, have been sorrow. That is the tragedy of it. You are trying to be gentle, and to my kinsman's mind gentleness is only ever the mask of a predator confident enough to hide its teeth. He does not fear you because he believes you are weak. He is beginning to fear you because he suspects you are strong and pretending not to be, and there is nothing a warrior of the Thren distrusts more than a strong thing that pretends. It offends the whole order of how he understands the world. The old Thren rose, slowly, unfolding to its full daunting height, and looked down at the girl with those ancient eyes. He will make you show him. I have known him since he hatched, and he will not be able to stop himself. When he does, child, I ask only this. Do not let him make you into what he is afraid of. Let him make you into what you are. It is a harder thing and a better one. And then it was gone, moving down the gallery steps with the ponderous grace of its kind, and Mara sat alone with her data slate and the sliding, indifferent voices of the chamber below, and understood that her mother had been right about everything except the timing. The test was not 3 days away. It was coming much sooner than that. It came that evening in the Commons. The Concord station's diplomatic ring had a shared commons at its hub, a wide circular space where delegations mingled outside the formality of the chamber. And it was there, over the strange communal meal that the station's protocol demanded each night, that the different species were meant to learn to tolerate one another as individuals. In practice, it meant that everyone stood in careful clusters of their own kind and watched everyone else, and the humans, being new and few, drew more watching than most. Mara stood at the edge of her delegation's cluster, holding a cup of something warm she was not going to drink, when the crowd near the center of the room shifted and parted, and Vorel Kosh came through it like weather. He had brought an audience. This, she would understand later, was the whole point. A Thren warrior did not test a thing in private, because a test in private proved nothing to the order he served. He had gathered a loose crowd of Thren and Selu, and even a few of the Ashketh, and he crossed the commons toward the human delegation with the unhurried certainty of someone who has already decided how the evening ends, and he stopped in front of Das Herrick and inclined his great head in a gesture that was almost, but not quite, respect. Envoy, he said, I offer greeting to your people in the manner of my own. Herrick, who had been a diplomat for 30 years, went very still, because he knew that the Thren did not offer their greetings lightly, and that the manner of the Thren involved contact. We're honored, he said carefully, though I'll confess I don't know all your customs. Perhaps you'd explain the manner so we don't give offense. It is the clasp, said Vorel Kosh. When two warriors of standing meet, they take one another by the forearm so. He raised his own arm, the gray hide banded with the darker cords of muscle, the four-fingered hand opening. And each measures the other not to harm but to know. It is how we learn the truth of a stranger. A soft grip speaks of a soft heart. A firm grip speaks of a firm one. We do not trust words, envoy. Words can be taught, but the arm cannot lie. And there it was, laid out in the open in front of 100 watching eyes, and done so cleverly that there was no gracious way to refuse it. To decline the clasp was to insult the entire Thren people in front of the whole Concord. To accept it was to put a human forearm into the grip of a creature that could crush station ductwork in its fist. Herrick understood the trap at once, and Mara watched him understand it, and she watched him do the only thing a good man could do. He offered his own arm. "Then let me be the one to meet you," Herrick said quietly. "I speak for my people, it should be me." Voralkash looked at the envoy's arm, thin and pale and trembling very slightly with a fear. The man was too proud to hide entirely, and the warrior made the untranslatable sound in his chest, and did not take it. "No," he said. "Not you." His slitted eyes moved past the envoy over the delegation and came to rest on the small figure at the edge of the cluster, the girl with the blunt-nailed hands and the cup she was not drinking. "The young one, the one who lifted the burden. I would take the measure of the one your people work so hard to hide." The commons went quiet in the particular way that a room goes quiet when everyone in it has understood, all at once, that they are about to watch something they will talk about for years. "She is a child," Herrick said, and his voice cracked on it, all the diplomacy gone, just a frightened man saying the truest thing he knew. "You will not touch her. I forbid it. Take my arm, take my life if your honor needs a human's, but you will not lay a hand on a child." "Then your people are cowards," said Voralkash, loudly, so that the whole commons heard it, "who hide behind their young and call it protection. I have offered the greeting of my order to your delegation, and you have refused it 3 times, and offered me instead your own soft arm as though I were a beggar to be fobbed off with a lesser coin. I do not want the coin you are willing to lose. I want the one you are afraid to spend. Give me the child, or admit before the whole Concord that your people have nothing in them worth the measuring." It was a masterful cruelty, and it worked exactly as he intended, because it left the humans no move that did not cost them everything. Refuse, and they were cowards who used their children as shields, and no coward species had ever been granted a seat in the Concord. Except, and they were monsters who would feed a child to a warrior's grip to buy their own standing. Herrick stood frozen between the two, his mouth open, no words coming, 30 years of careful language failing him all at once, and Mara watched the trap close around her delegation like a fist, and she felt her mother's hand on her shoulder from the night before, and she heard the old Thren's voice. "Let him make you into what you are." She set down her cup. "Mara," Mara Voss said, very low. She had come up beside her daughter without a sound, and her broad face was gray. "No, this isn't yours to carry." "Yes, it is," Mara said. She found to her mild surprise that her voice was steady. "It was always going to be mine. He's right that you're hiding something, Mom. You're hiding the one thing that would actually change their minds because you're afraid of what happens when they see it. But they're never going to give us a seat as long as they think we're kittens. And I'm tired." The coal in her chest was not hot anymore. It had gone clear and cold and certain, the way it did on the climbing wall when the ground was very far down and there was nothing to do but move. "I'm tired of standing at the edge of every room. I can do this. You said it yourself. I can hold still, and I can be gentle, and I can let him be the one to explain it afterward." Mara, her mother's hand tightened. "If you hurt him, they will have every excuse they've been looking for. If you break their warrior in front of the whole Convocation, we're finished. Do you understand? It has to be perfect. You have to give them exactly the truth and not 1 gram more." Mara looked up at her mother, and something passed between them. Some old understanding out of the heavy world where they had both been made, where the difference between a controlled force and an uncontrolled one was the difference between saving a trapped man and dropping the beam on him. "I know," Mara said. "I've been holding still my whole life. Watch how good I am at it." And she stepped out of the cluster, past the frozen envoy, into the cleared space at the center of the commons, and she looked up, a long way up at the warrior of the Thren, and she lifted her ordinary right arm and offered it to him. "Gently," she said, and her translator carried the word out into the silence. "You said the arm can't lie, So let's not make it lie. Take my measure, warrior, but be careful what you go looking for. My mother taught me that when you ask a real question, you have to be ready for a real answer. Vorokash looked down at the small offered arm, and for just a moment, so brief that only the old records keeper standing at the back of the crowd seemed to notice it, something crossed the warrior's slitted eyes that was not triumph at all. It was the first cold breath of doubt. Then he reached out and closed his great gray hand around the forearm of a 16-year-old girl, and the whole tall galaxy leaned in to watch a kitten be taught its place. The first thing Mara noticed was that his grip was not, in fact, very strong. She had braced for it. She had stood in the cleared circle and reminded herself of the rules her mother had drilled into her, and she had expected the warrior's hand to close on her arm like the hydraulic clamps on the ore haulers back home, expected pressure that would make her set her jaw and breathe through her nose and hold against the urge to pull away. And the hand did close, and it was large, and the 4 blunt fingers wrapped all the way around her forearm and overlapped, and it began to squeeze. And it was nothing. It was, she thought with a strange lurch of vertigo, about like the grip of her friend Petra, who was 12. It was firm. It was meant, she understood, to be crushing. Somewhere in the physiology of the Thren, it represented the full measured strength of an adult warrior making a serious point. And Mara felt it press her skin against the bone of her arm, and she felt her body's automatic readiness for pain arrive and then stand there, confused, because the pain did not come. On a world where a fall from standing height could break a hip, where every child learned before the age of 5 to catch its own considerable weight or suffer for it, Mara Voss had grown a skeleton and a wrapping of muscle that were, by the gentle standards of the Concord, absurd. Her bones were dense as hardwood. Her tendons anchored to that bone with the overbuilt margin of a body that had spent 16 years being pulled toward the ground by a force that would have flattened everyone watching. The warrior was squeezing her arm with what he believed was overwhelming strength, and to Mara it felt like being held. She did not smile. That was important, and some cool, clear part of her mind held onto it even as the rest of her reeled with the revelation. Do not smile, do not gloat, do not make him small in front of his people. Let him make you into what you are. She kept her face open and calm, and she looked up at Vorokash and she waited. The warrior squeezed harder. His notion of the clasp was that it was a conversation, and that the conversation had a rhythm. First the meeting grip, firm and testing. Then the measuring pressure, in which each warrior increased the force by degrees, reading the other's response, learning where the limit lay. A young warrior might flinch early and reveal his softness. A hardened one might hold longer, might return pressure, might turn the greeting into a quiet contest of wills that both could walk away from with honor. Vorokash had done this 1,000 times. He knew the exact progression of a Thren arm under load, the point where the muscle began to tremble, the point where the skin whitened, the point where the joint began to protest, and honor allowed the loser to yield. He was watching for all of it. He increased the pressure to the level that made grown Thren warriors set their feet. And the child looked up at him and did not move. He saw her notice the pressure. He saw her body register it, the small automatic tension of a living thing under force. But there was no flinch. There was no tremble. Her arm in his hand was not the yielding, compressible thing he had held 10,000 times. It was like closing his fist around a bar of the station's structural alloy. It did not give. There was no meat to compress down toward a bone that would eventually complain, because the meat and the bone were of a piece, dense and cool and utterly unbothered, and his fingers had already reached the limit of their closing, not because they had met her pain but because they had met her, the simple physical fact of her, and could go no further. Vorokash increased the pressure to a level he had never before used on a living being, a level meant for testing the give of dead materials, and the girl's expression changed by exactly 1 degree. Her brows drew very slightly together. the look of someone noticing that a companion's handshake has gone on a beat too long and is becoming faintly uncomfortable. "That's about as much as most doors give," Mara said quietly. Only he could hear it, and the old records keeper, whose great head had come up sharply at the back of the crowd. "You can stop now if you want. You've taken my measure. You know what you're holding. There's no shame in letting go." It was a mercy, offered in good faith, and it was the worst thing she could have said, because Voral Kosh was a warrior of the Thren, and he had just been offered mercy by a creature a third his size in front of the entire Concord, and something in him broke free of its moorings. Not his arm, his pride. He had come here to teach a lesson about the order of the strong and the weak, and the lesson was teaching itself in the wrong direction in front of every eye that mattered. And the old certainty that had held his whole life together, that tallness was strength and strength was worth, and the small soft peoples of the galaxy existed to be measured and found wanting, was coming apart in his hand like wet paper. He did the thing that frightened men do when their world stops making sense. He stopped measuring, and he tried to win. He wrenched. It was no longer the clasp. He hauled the girl's arm sideways and down with the full torque of his massive frame, the move that ended contests, meant to fold her to the floor and put her on her knees where the natural order said she belonged, meant to remind her and everyone watching that a child does not offer mercy to a warrior. He put everything into it, all the leverage of his 3-meter height and his warrior's training, and he expected her to go down like a felled sapling. She did not go down. Mara felt the wrench come, and she felt her mother's voice, and she felt the ground of the heavy world under her that was always, in some part of her, under her. She set her feet. It was the most ordinary thing in the world to her, the same small adjustment she made stepping off a ledge on the climbing wall, the automatic bracing of a body that had spent its whole life managing forces larger than this. She rooted her weight down through her legs and into the deck, and the warrior's entire strength arrived against her braced frame and simply stopped, and the tableau held, frozen, a giant hauling with all his might at the arm of a girl who stood as still as a mooring post, while the crowd made a single indrawn sound like wind through a gap. And then Voral Kosh, humiliated, desperate, no longer thinking, no longer a diplomat's guard performing a lesson but only a cornered thing lashing out, drew back his free hand into a fist and swung it at the child's face. That changed everything. Up until that instant, whatever had passed between them, it had been a greeting, a contest, a thing with rules that both had agreed to. A strike was outside the rules. A strike was an attack on a 16-year-old girl in front of 100 witnesses by a fully grown armored warrior, and every law of the Concord and every instinct in Mara's body agreed on what it was. Das Herrick shouted. Mara Voss was already moving, too far away, too slow. And Mara, who had promised her mother she would be gentle, who had held still her whole life, who had offered mercy twice, saw the fist come and understood in the cold, clear space behind her eyes that being gentle was no longer one of the choices she had. She did not hit him. That was the thing that everyone who told the story afterward always got wrong, and that the records of the Concord would eventually take great care to correct. She did not strike the warrior. She did the only thing a person from a heavy world knows how to do when a great mass is falling toward them, the thing she had done to the beam over the trapped miner, the thing that was in her hands the way language is in a throat. She caught it. Her left hand came up and closed around the warrior's descending fist and forearm, and she stopped it. Not deflected it, not turned it aside. Stopped it dead, the full committed weight of a lunging 3-meter warrior arrested in the air a handspan from her face by the grip of a child, and this time she did not hold gently, because holding gently was for greetings and this was no longer a greeting. She held the way you hold a thing that is trying to hurt you and must be made to stop. She closed her hand. The sound was not loud. People expected when they told the story later that it would have been loud, a great dramatic crack, but it was not. It was a series of small, wet, crowded sounds, muffled inside the banded armor of the warrior's forearm, the sound of a structure that had been built to be strong under the gentle physics of a kind world encountering, all at once, a force it had never been designed to survive. The Thren skeleton was a fine and clever thing, light and efficient and perfectly suited to a body that had never needed to be more. It was not suited to this. The armored sheath crumpled inward under Mara's fingers like a drinking vessel closing in a fist, and inside it the warrior's forearm gave way, not torn, not shattered outward, nothing that would make anyone in the crowd have to look away, but folded, the long bones bowing and buckling under a grip that had, for one instant, stopped being careful. Voral-Kosh made a sound then that his translator did not attempt, and it was the true voice of the Thren, and it was pain. Mara let go instantly. That was the second thing that everyone got wrong when they told the story, and the thing that Sina Torvald, watching from the back with its ancient eyes wide, understood at once to be the only thing that actually mattered. The moment the fist stopped being a threat, the moment the warrior's strength collapsed and he was no longer an attacker but only an injured person, the child released him. She did not press her advantage. She did not throw him. She did not stand over him. She opened her hand and stepped back and caught his great falling weight against her shoulder as his legs went, easing him down to the deck of the commons with a care that was almost tender, going to one knee to lower him gently so that a warrior of the Thren would not simply crash to the floor in front of his people. She knelt there holding the cradled arm of the being who, one heartbeat before, had swung a fist at her face, and her own face was not triumphant and was not afraid. It was stricken. It was the face of a girl who had done a terrible thing to keep a worse one from happening, and who understood exactly how terrible it was, and who was not going to pretend otherwise. "Medical," she said, into the ringing silence of the commons, and her voice did not shake. "He needs a medic." "His arm, please, quickly." And then more quietly to the warrior himself, whose slitted eyes had gone wide and stunned and fixed on her face as though seeing her for the very first time. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I told you to be careful what you went looking for. I told you not to make it lie." She was still holding his ruined forearm steady so that the broken bones would not grind, holding it the way you hold something precious and hurt, and there were tears standing in her eyes that had not been there through any of the rest of it. "I didn't want this. I offered you mercy twice. Why didn't you take it? Why does it always have to be this?" The commons erupted. Medics came running. The Thren delegation surged forward in a wall of gray, and for one terrible moment the whole thing balanced on a knife, because a warrior of the Thren lay broken on the deck and a human child knelt over him, and there were 100 ways for the next 10 seconds to end in disaster. Mara Voss was there, pulling her daughter back, putting her own broad body between Mara and the advancing wall of warriors. Herrick was shouting for calm. And into the middle of it, moving with a slow and absolute authority that stopped the whole surging crowd the way a hand stops a struck bell, came the old records keeper, Sina Torvald, who lifted its great gray arms and spoke a single word in the true tongue of the Thren that no translator rendered, but that every Thren in the room obeyed as though it were law. They stopped. The Old One looked down at the fallen warrior, and at the medics working over him, and at the small human girl held behind her mother's arm, and its ancient dark eyes moved slowly across the whole silent commons, taking the measure, at last, of the thing that everyone had refused to see. And when it spoke in the trade tongue, so that the translators would carry it to every species in the room, so that there could be no mistake and no forgetting. "Witness," said Sina Torvald, "what has been shown to us, and let no one in this Concord ever again say that they were not told." They did not arrest her, though for the first hour it was not clear that they would not. Mara sat in a small side chamber off the medical bay with her mother's arm around her, shaking now that it was over, the way the body shakes when the cold, clear place recedes and lets all the ordinary fear come flooding back in. Das Herrick paced. 2 Thren warriors stood at the door, not quite guards and not quite an escort, and through the wall Mara could hear the medics working over Voral-Kosh, and the low, urgent conference of the Concords, magistrates trying to decide what, exactly, had just happened, and whose fault it was, and what the law required them to do about a child who had folded a warrior's arm in her hand. "He struck first," Herrick kept saying to no one rehearsing. "Every witness saw it. He struck at a minor. She acted in defense. There is no jurisdiction in the Concord that would call that a crime." But his hands were unsteady, because he had been a diplomat long enough to know that law and consequence were different animals, and that a small new species that broke a great old one's warrior might find that being right was not the same as being safe. Beyond the walls of that little chamber, the station was arguing about her. Mara could not hear the words, but she could feel the shape of it the way she had learned to feel the shape of rooms, and later she would learn what had been said, because the records keeper would tell her, and because a thing witnessed by 100 species does not stay private for long. The cello representative, whose people had wondered aloud whether humanity's short lives made it untrustworthy, had risen in an emergency session of the magistrates, and demanded that the human delegation be confined to its ship pending a full inquiry, arguing that a species which could produce such a thing in an untrained child was a species too dangerous to be allowed to walk the station freely. It was the reflex of a comfortable people meeting something it did not understand, and it was, Mara would think afterward, exactly the reflex her mother had feared. Fear without respect, reaching straight for the cage. But the Ashketh delegate had clicked its way to its feet and disagreed, and its disagreement was the first crack in the old picture. The Ashketh were a cold and precise people, and they did not deal in fear, only in accuracy, and their delegate had reviewed the recordings of the Commons frame by frame in the space of an hour, and had come to the session with numbers. It laid the numbers out for the magistrates in its dry, rustling voice. The human child had been gripped with a force sufficient to fracture Thren bone, and had not been harmed. The human child had been wrenched with a torque sufficient to throw a Thren warrior from his feet, and had not moved. The human child had been struck at with lethal intent by an adult warrior, and had, in the fraction of a second available to her, chosen not to strike back but to catch, and having caught, had chosen the instant the threat ended to release, and having released, had chosen to kneel and cushion the fall of the one who had attacked her. Every one of those choices, the Ashketh said, had been made by a creature its own people considered a child, under a stress that would have shattered the composure of any grown delegate in the chamber, and every one of those choices had bent toward mercy. A species that dangerous, the Ashketh concluded, that could do so much harm and had, at every branching point, done so little, was not a species to be caged. It was a species to be understood, and understood quickly, before someone's fear made a decision that could not be unmade. The Thren had said nothing at all in the session, which the magistrates found more unnerving than any speech, because the Thren were the injured party, and an injured Thren who did not demand redress was a thing the Concord had no precedent for. They had simply sat, the great gray wall of them, and waited, and it would be another day before the Concord understood that they were not waiting for justice. They were waiting for the records keeper to finish taking the measure of what had happened, because among the Thren it was the keeper of records and not the warriors who decided what a thing meant, and Sina Torvald had not yet spoken. The whole station held itself in that suspension, 100 species poised between the cage and the open hand, and the thing that would tip them one way or the other was, at that moment, sitting in a side chamber off the medical bay, shaking in her mother's arms, 16 years old and sick with the knowledge of what her hands had done. It was Sina Torvald who came for her, in the end. The old records keeper filled the doorway and dismissed the two warriors with a flick of one gray hand, and it came and lowered itself onto the bench across from Mara with the slow care of the very old, and it looked at the girl for a long moment before it spoke. "He will keep the arm," it said. "Our medicine is not so poor as our strength, it seems. The bones will be set and grown again, and in half a year he will lift with it as he did before. You did not take his arm from him, child. Remember that in the nights when you cannot sleep, and you will have such nights because I can see that you are not a creature that does harm easily. You did not take his arm. You stopped his fist, and the stopping cost him a season's healing, and that is all. He is alive and whole in every way that will matter by winter, because when he was helpless you chose to set him down gently instead of finishing what he began. I watched you make that choice. So did 100 others. It is the only reason we are speaking in a quiet room and not across a battle. Mara swallowed. Is he going to be all right? Really? The old Thren regarded her, and something moved in the ancient face that might have been the Thren equivalent of wonder. You ask after the well-being of the being who tried to break your face, it said. Do you know, child, that in all the long history of my people, I do not think a warrior has ever once, after a defeat, been asked after with worry by the one who defeated him. We do not do it. It is not in us. And here is a soft, small creature from a client world weeping over the health of the arm she folded. It shook its great head slowly. You keep doing this. You keep showing us the thing behind the thing. Everyone in that room saw the strength. You are the only one who is still thinking about the mercy. That more than the strength is what I mean to tell them. Come. It is time you were seen properly and heard and understood, because if this is left to the diplomats they will make it about power, and it was never about power. Come and tell them what you are. And so, an hour later, they brought Mara Voss into the great bowl of the Convocation chamber, and for the first time in her life she stood at the bottom of a room instead of at its edge, and every tall people of the Concord looked down at her, and it was very quiet. She was afraid. She would say so afterward to anyone who asked. She stood there in her ordinary clothes with the bruise coming up on her forearm where the warrior's grip had, after all, left its mark, a purple band that the Concord's physicians would study for weeks, because it was proof that she could be marked at all. And she looked up at the tiered ranks of the species who had spent 2 days deciding. She was a problem to be managed, and she was terribly afraid. But she thought of the beam over the trapped miner, and she thought of every room she had stood at the edge of, and she thought of what her mother had said, that she carried in her 2 arms a thing the diplomats could not put on a table. And she understood, standing there, that the whole reason the tall galaxy had gotten humanity so wrong was that no human had ever simply stood in front of it and told the truth plainly, because the humans had been so afraid of being feared that they had let themselves be pitied instead. She was done being pitied. My name is Mara Voss, she said. Her translator carried it up into the bowl, into 100 listening devices, out to the ships in dock and the worlds beyond. I'm 16 years old. On my world that's a child, and I want to say that first, because I think most of you have been treating my whole species like children, and I want you to understand that when you look at me you are looking at what my people consider not yet grown. I'm not a warrior. I'm not special. Back home I lose foot races to my friends and I come second in the climbing meets, and there is nothing about me, nothing at all, that any human from my world would think was worth remarking on. I need you to hear that because it's the most important thing I'm going to say. I am ordinary. What you saw tonight was an ordinary girl from an ordinary family, and that should frighten you more than if I were a champion, and I'm going to tell you why, and then I'm going to ask you to stop being frightened, because being frightened of us is the mistake, not the truth. She drew a breath, and she told them about Earth. She told them about a world of punishing gravity and crushing seas and air that changed its poison with the seasons. She told them about 4 billion years of a planet inventing new ways to kill the things that lived on it, ice and fire and flood and famine, and the endless arms race of predator and prey, and how out of that long murder a species had climbed that could run down antelope over the course of a day, not because it was fast, but because it would not ever, no matter how tired, no matter how hot, stop. She told them what the Concord's own biologists could confirm if they cared to look, that the human body was a machine for enduring, that it carried its own water and cooled itself by sweating and could keep moving long after every other running animal on its world had collapsed, that it healed from wounds that would kill the gentle peoples and walked off illnesses that would end them, that it had been built by the worst world any of them had ever heard of to survive things that the kind worlds of the Concord had never once had to imagine. And then she told them about the colonies. She told them about Baraka, where she was born, a world so heavy that the Concord's own survey had marked it uninhabitable, and how the humans had gone there anyway and simply lived, and how the children born there grew bones like hardwood and muscle like cable, not because anyone bred them for it or trained them for it, but because that was what a human body did when you asked it to. It met the world it was given, and it became strong enough to bear it, every time, without being asked twice. You looked at us and you saw small, Mara said, and her voice was steady now, and it filled the great quiet bowl. You saw short and you saw new, and you saw a species with slow ships and few numbers, and you decided that meant weak, and you decided weak meant safe, and you started making plans for us the way you'd make plans for a client, for something you could own. And I understand why. I do. Because everyone in this room grew up on a kind world. Your ancestors got the gift of an easy planet, a planet that let you take your time, that let you get tall and slow and comfortable, that never once in a billion years tried as hard to kill you as mine tries to kill me every single ordinary day. And you mistook that gift for strength. You thought that because you were comfortable, you were strong. But comfort isn't strength. Comfort is just what you get to have when the world stops trying to break you. My people never got the comfort. We only ever got the breaking. And this, she held up her ordinary, bruised, blunt-nailed hand, the hand that had stopped a warrior's fist, is what's left when a world spends 4 billion years trying to break something and fails. The chamber was utterly silent. Even the Ashketh had gone still in their exoskeletons. I need you to understand that I didn't want to hurt him, she went on, and her voice caught for the first time, and she let it, because her mother had taught her that a real answer is not afraid to be a whole answer. The warrior, Voral Kosh, I offered him mercy twice before he swung at me. I told him to be careful what he went looking for. Everything I have is built for stopping things, not breaking them, and stopping and breaking are so close together for someone like me that I have to be careful every hour of every day. And I was careful, right up until he tried to hit a child in the face. And then I caught his fist because that's what my hands know how to do, and I closed them because I was afraid, and I've been sick about it ever since. That's the other thing my world made. It didn't just make us strong. It made us know exactly how much a strong thing costs and how carefully you have to carry it, because on a heavy world the difference between saving someone and killing them is one wrong grip, and every one of us learns that before we learn to read. She looked up at the ranked delegations, at the Selu and the Ashketh and the great gray wall of the Thren. That's the truth about humanity. It was never savagery. We're not a warrior race. We're not coming to conquer anyone. The strength was never the point. The point is that we're gentle on purpose, all the time with everything because we have to be, because we grew up holding a power that could hurt the people we love, and we learned to hold it kindly. You have spent 2 days afraid of the wrong thing. Don't be afraid of how strong we are. Be glad of how careful we had to become to survive it. She let her hand fall to her side. I'm not asking you to make us your equals because we're strong, she said. Strong isn't a reason to respect anybody. I'm asking you to stop being afraid long enough to see the whole of us. The strength and the mercy that had to grow up right next to it. You've seen both now. You saw me fold a warrior's arm, and you saw me weep over it and beg for a medic and kneel to set him down gently so he wouldn't fall. Both of those were human. Both of those were ordinary where I come from. That's what we are. That's what we've always been. All we ever wanted was for someone to look at us long enough to see it. She found her mother's face in the human delegation, gray and streaked and fiercely proud, and she found the strength to finish. I'm 16. I'm a child. I shouldn't have had to be the one to show you, but you kept looking at the wrong thing and someone had to turn your head. So now you've seen it, now you know. The question isn't what we are anymore. You know what we are. The question is what you're going to do about it, and whether you're brave enough to meet us as friends, now that you can't pretend we're pets." She stopped, she had nothing left. And into the vast silence of the convocation chamber, from somewhere high in the gray ranks of the Thren, a single sound began, low and rhythmic and building, and it took Mara a moment to understand what it was, because she had never heard it before and would never forget it after. It was the warriors, striking their forearms against their chests. It was the oldest salute the Thren had, the one they gave only to a strength that had proven itself worthy, and it had never in the recorded history of that ancient people been given to another species, and it had certainly never been given to a child. It rolled down out of the high seats and filled the bowl and shook the air, and Sina Torvald, standing beside the small human girl at the bottom of the room, bowed its great gray head so that its ancient face was level with hers, and said, so quietly that only she could hear it over the thunder, "You did not let him make you into what he feared. You made yourself into what you are in front of all of us, and it is a better thing and a harder one, and you did it while you were still a child. Go home to your heavy world, Mara Voss, and grow up and come back to us when you are grown. There will be a seat waiting. I will keep it myself." The Convocation did not decide that night. Great old institutions never decide anything in a single night, and the Concord had 5,000 years of caution woven into its every procedure, and the granting of a seat was a matter of ratifications and protocols and the slow ascent of 100 worlds. But something had shifted in the great bowl of the chamber that could not be shifted back, and everyone in it knew, and the days that followed were not the days of a client species being managed. They were the days of a new people being courted. Mara did not much enjoy the courting. She was 16, and she had wanted more than anything to be left alone, and instead she found herself the most looked-at creature on the whole of Concord Station, followed by whispers, studied by biologists who wanted only to run one small test, sought out by delegates who a week before would not have learned her name and who now wished, very earnestly, to be her friend. She bore it the way she bore everything, patiently, planted, taking up exactly as much space as she chose to, and she gave the biologists their tests because her mother said it would help, and she let the delegates talk at her, and she waited for it to be over so she could go home to a world that did not think she was a marvel. She went to see Voral Kosh on the third day. The medical bay had given him a private recovery chamber, and his arm was bound in a healing sheath of Thren medicine, splinted and immobilized, the fingers just visible at the end of it, and he was sitting up when the door admitted the small human girl who had put him there. He went very still when he saw her. She stopped just inside the door, suddenly unsure, all her steadiness from the chamber gone now that there were no witnesses and no speech to give, just a girl and the person she had hurt. "I wanted to see if you were okay," she said. "You don't have to talk to me. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. I couldn't leave the station without saying I was sorry to your face. Saying it in front of everyone doesn't count. That was for them. This is for you." For a long moment the warrior said nothing, and his slitted eyes moved over her, and she could not read what was in them. Then he lifted his good hand slowly and gestured to the chair beside the bed, and she came and sat in it, small in the great room, and he looked down at her from his lessened height and made the sound in his chest that she had heard on the first day, the untranslatable one, except that now, somehow, she thought she understood it a little. "I have been a warrior for 20 years, he said at last, and his translated voice was quiet. "I have measured 1,000 strangers by the arm, and I have never once been wrong about what I would find. The soft are soft and the firm are firm and the arm does not lie, and I built my whole life on the certainty of it. And then a hatchling offered me its arm and told me to be careful what I went looking for, and I did not listen, because I could not imagine that a thing so small could be telling me a truth I did not already know." He was silent a moment. "You offered me mercy, and I mistook it for weakness, and I swung at the face of a child, in front of the whole Concord, because my certainty was dearer to me than my honor. And you caught my fist, and you could have finished me, and instead you knelt down and set me on the floor like I was something you did not want to see broken. Do you know what that is, human child, to a warrior of the Thren? To be spared by the one you attacked, to be handled gently by the one you tried to harm. I don't know your customs, Mara said quietly. I told you that. I'm sorry if I... It is the deepest honor we have, Vorokosh said. It is the thing we tell stories about for 1,000 years. The strong one who could destroy and chooses instead to lift. We have a name for it that your machine cannot say. We give that name to perhaps one warrior in a generation, if we are fortunate, and most generations we do not give it at all, because it is so very rare that a being with the power to break also carries the will to be gentle. And here it was given to me by a soft, small creature from a client world, a child not even grown, who did it without knowing she had done anything at all, because for your people it is not rare. It is only Tuesday. He shook his great head slowly, and something in the gesture was wonder and something in it was grief, the grief of a man watching the certainty of his whole life turn out to have been small. You have taught me a thing I did not want to learn and cannot now unlearn. That I mistook comfort for strength my whole life, exactly as you said to the Convocation. That the strong thing is not the one that can break. It is the one that can break and does not. My people forgot that, somewhere in our long, comfortable centuries. You came and reminded us, and it cost you a bruise and me a season, and it is the cheapest lesson I have ever bought and the dearest one I own. He extended his good hand across the space between them, the 4 blunt fingers open, and Mara looked at it and understood. The clasp, she said. The clasp, he agreed. Properly this time, not to measure you. I know your measure now, and so does the whole Concord, to greet you, as one who is strong greets another, gently, Mara Voss. As gently as you know how, which I am told is very gently indeed. And Mara reached out and took the warrior's forearm in her ordinary hand, so lightly that it would not have crushed a flower, and he closed his hand around her arm as softly as he was able. And the two of them, the giant and the child, held one another's arms in the quiet room, and neither one squeezed, and it was, at last, the truest greeting either of them had ever given. She went home a week later. The long voyage back to Baraka colony gave her time to become ordinary again, and by the time the heavy world reached up and caught the descending ship in its familiar crushing embrace, she had mostly stopped being the girl who broke a warrior's arm and gone back to being the girl who lost foot races to Tavi and came second in the climbing meets. The colony had heard, of course. Everyone had heard. But the colony's way of hearing was a heavy world's way, unimpressed, practical, and her friends greeted her at the landing field not with awe but with the rough affection of people who had known her since she could barely walk. And Tavi told her he was glad she was back and also that she still couldn't beat him, and Petra hugged her hard enough to bruise. And it was, in every way that Mara cared about, exactly as though she had never left. Only her mother saw the rest of it. Only Anais Voss, who had stood at the bottom of the Convocation chamber and watched her daughter turn the head of a galaxy, understood what the girl had carried and what it had cost her to set it down gently. They stood together on the eastern scarp on the first evening home, in the heavy familiar light of the world that had made them both, and they looked out over the colony's low, strong buildings, and the fields of engineered grain bowing under a gravity that no conquered world had ever known, and for a while neither of them spoke. "They're going to give us the seat," Anais said at last. "The word came through this morning, provisional membership, ratified by 4 of the 6 great powers with the Thren sponsoring us themselves. Full membership to follow, they say, once the protocols are complete. It's done, Mara. 30 years of trying, and it took my 16-year-old daughter 3 days." She was quiet a moment. "Your father would have been so proud he couldn't have stood it. He'd have wept all over the landing field and embarrassed you in front of your friends." Mara smiled at that, a small sad smile because she still missed him, the way you miss someone the heavy world took too soon. "I didn't do it to get the seat," she said. "I want you to know that. I didn't even do it on purpose. I just got tired of standing at the edge of the room." "I know," her mother said. "That's why it worked. If you'd meant to impress them, they'd have felt it and they'd have been afraid, and being afraid is how they'd have justified anything. But you weren't trying to be more than you were. You just stopped letting them make you into less." Anais put her heavy, warm hand on her daughter's shoulder, the honest weight of home, and Mara leaned into it. "You gave them the whole truth and not 1 gram more, the strength and the mercy both. You have no idea, Mara, how rare it is for a person to be able to do that. Most people, when they finally get to show the room how strong they are, they can't stop it strong. They have to go on and be cruel with it, just a little, just to make the room pay for all the times it made them small. You didn't. You folded a warrior's arm and then you wept over it and knelt to set him down gently, and that's the thing that changed a galaxy. Not the strength. Anyone can be strong. The strength was never the point." Below them, the colony's lights came on against the falling dark, small and warm and stubborn on the surface of a world that had spent every day of 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it and had, once again, failed. Somewhere down there Tavi was probably already asleep, and Petra was probably still telling the story, and the engineered grain bowed and rose in the heavy wind, and the whole impossible, murderous, beloved planet held its people close against its chest with the crushing, unrelenting, patient grip that had made them what they were. Mara looked at her hands in the dying light. Ordinary hands. Blunt-nailed, a little scarred, an old fading bruise across one forearm where a warrior of the Thren had, after all, managed to mark her. They did not look like the hands that had changed the mind of a galaxy. They looked like the hands of a girl who lost foot races and came second in the climbing meets, which was exactly what they were, which was exactly the point. "I'm not special, Mom," she said. It was not sad the way she said it. It was almost like relief. "I'm really not, that's the whole thing. That's the whole truth about us. There's nothing special about me at all." "No," her mother agreed, and pulled her daughter closer against the heavy, comfortable warmth of her side. And together they watched the lights of the strong, small, stubborn colony burn against the dark of the enormous, gentle, astonished galaxy that had finally, after all this time, learned to look at humanity and see it whole. "You're perfectly ordinary, every single one of you. And that, my brave girl, is the most frightening and the most wonderful thing about us, and they are only just beginning to understand it." The wind came up off the scarp, heavy and warm, and the mother and the daughter stood in it together, planted, unhurried, taking up exactly as much space as they chose to. Two ordinary people from a world that had never once been kind, holding the whole quiet weight of what they were as gently, and as carefully, and as easily as they had been holding it their entire lives.